I think it really reflects growing uncertainty out there in the markets. The medical professionals are not telling you when this is going to be resolved, and so we don't have a clear perspective on what that means for corporate profits moving forward. But at the same time, we know the playbook in some countries. We know that we're making some progress in China. To some extent, we're seeing some progress right now, even in South Korea. And, of course, we've seen the very stern measures that have been taken in Italy. So if all those things continue along that path, I think it's just a matter of time before we will at least see some light at the end of the tunnel. I will grant you that it is a scary time because historically when the equity market drops by more than 20%, which is defined as a bear market, 60% of the time we get a recession. But remember, in 2018, we dropped by 19.8%, and we did not get a recession. So clearly, the odds of a recession have increased, but that does not automatically mean that it's a foregone conclusion.
Anthony, you referred to some other countries. China, we, of course, have been covering this since late December, and there they were taking the temperatures of people when they were traveling. I was just talking to a journalist today, a journalist friend of his, just back from Italy, took one of the last trains out of the town before they closed things off. Flew into New York, they stamped his passport, nobody took his temperature, nobody on his flight. So these measures that you're seeing in other places, you're just not seeing here in the United States. Doesn't that give you pause?
It does give me a little source of concern, and it certainly gave the equity markets a source of concern because it really tells me that the time it will take to slow this down in those countries that are not taking those stern measures will be longer, but we should not confuse a longer period with an indefinite period, because you could easily argue that the reaction of the market, certainly in the last couple of days, is almost assuming that this virus is going to last indefinitely. Let's not lose sight of the fact that the Spanish flu in 1918, nobody was taking the temperature of individuals, and in fact, the medical profession was not as advanced, and yet, in less than a year, we saw a cessation of that virus. It did come back later on, but the hope and expectation is that if we can see a slowdown and almost a elimination of that virus, that somehow when it comes back, we'll have the vaccine ready. During my lifetime, the average time that it has taken to develop a vaccine is anywhere from 10 to 15 years. I don't think anybody is arguing that at this present time that a vaccine for COVID-19 is going to take anywhere that long.
Anthony, but Christine Lagarde months ago was talking about the possibility of a global recession. She was talking about how soft things were out there, the trade war. That was long before this, and we're seeing kind of this domino effect with all these different countries being impacted. So your thoughts on a recession?
Well, again, the risk have clearly increased, and the trade situation was certainly a negative headwind. But what people are not talking about is that right now, Washington is focused like a laser beam on trying to avoid a recession. That's why they're talking about all these fiscal measures. That's why they're going to hopefully support all that expenditures. You saw that law that was passed and that was signed by the president to actually spend more money on health care, all those things. And let's not lose sight of the fact that if push comes to shove, I think the United States will consider very strongly pulling back a lot of those tariffs that we have now on Chinese products, and the Chinese doing the same thing. So even though those were real negative headwinds, we can almost turn that back off, almost like a light switch if we needed to, certainly if Washington thought there was a threat of a recession, because historically you can see that if there is a recession in the 2 years leading into a presidential election, you can see that in every single instance, dating back all the way back to Calvin Coolidge, only once when Calvin Coolidge was president, if you have a recession, the person in the White House, Democrat or Republican, doesn't get reelected. I think they understand that message quite well, so there is nothing, in my judgment, that they would not do to at least avoid the possibility of a recession.
Anthony, we don't have a lot more time, but I want to ask you about the Asian markets because they're going to be opening in about an hour and a half. And you know, virus spreads, so does panic. What will we be watching for? What are you looking for?
I'm looking for the continued numbers to see that Asia, or especially China, is continuing to make progress in terms of that second derivative, the new cases being developed. That's what we're looking for in the United States. We're not there yet, but I think I'm a lot more optimistic about China.